Hi everyone, Trina Phoenix here, and this is the Hidden Secrets of the Divine Feminine, and I think we're on 1.2. And I wanted to start with a different part of the book, but it was profound and it just resonates with me so much. And it says, the teachings that must be suppressed. And then this is written by Ann Barding and Andrew Harvey, The Divine Feminine. And they write, wisdom, justice, beauty, harmony, and compassion are the qualities that have traditionally been identified with the divine feminine. Yet, it is also the irresistible power that destroys old forms and brings new ones into being. The inspiration of the love in action that is so needed to transform a culture radically out of touch with its soul. So, the divine feminine stirs up all the old programs and all the old things, and we start to question all that is. Okay, so where we were was in the Magician's Quest and the Philosopher's Stone. Let me make sure I'm getting the paint box of the divine. We went through that. The one world tree. Yeah, the symbol of the absolute behind it all. I looked at her hand. Yes. Okay, so we are in still chapter 1, the Magician's Quest, I thought. The Philosopher's Stone. These were part of the secret societies connected with the search for the Holy Grail. I knew that for centuries there were legends of medieval alchemists who had sought the formulas that would turn lead into gold, create the fountain of youth, and allow them to attain immortality. These were clearly a metaphor for something much deeper. Shasta went on, whenever someone goes to church to worship, the church uses the same elements, don't they? The Catholic fathers took this knowledge of ritual and ceremony from the priestess long, long ago. Because it engages the inner senses as well as the outer ones. I thought about what she was saying. Yes, they did use air, earth, fire, and water. These 4 elements were part of every religious ceremony I had ever attended. The burning of the incense used both air and fire. So did the lighting of the candles. The water was intrinsic to baptism and the sprinkling of the holy water, which represented the cleansing. The drinking of wine and eating communion, wafers, they were part of the earth, as well as the golden chalice. The sacred cup could represent anything, from the act of receiving to the womb of the Holy Mother herself. At the Eucharist, we even say, "Take, eat. This is my body that was given for you and for all men." Shasta was right. This was how all of the most beautiful ceremonies were done virtually in every religion. They use the 4 elements because they work, she said. She opened her hand and gestured around the yard. Now look around you. This is the goddess's true cathedral. Trisha made of the natural elements. This is why our ancestors built campfires and sat around them. It wasn't just to stay warm or cook food. It was to dream with the fire. Anyone who has gone camping knows this. When we stare into the flames of the campfire, we enter into an altered state, a place where our vision takes us beyond mundane things of life and into the dream time. She looked out at the grove. Those cauldrons are merely holders for the alchemical fire of transmutation, like the chalice. It's as simple as that. I took a deep breath. Her words were part of something that I had always felt, as if nature itself was the real holy place. It was not in the house of worship. I realized then that my silly fears were part of a religious prejudice against all other faith, spawned by my own Christian upbringing. It was based on ignorance. We had always been taught that anything earth-centered was evil. Although, stepping back from it now, I realized that it was patently, sorry, I can't say that word right now, that it was absurd. The earth was the only reason any of us had any life at all. Each day we ate from her, we drank from her, we breathed her air. How could anyone consider that evil? It was like separating yourself from the sacredness of God. Even though I thought I had graduated long ago from the overt opposition of the church, clearly there were still pockets of its upside-down logic left in my psyche. As beautiful as organized religions can be, I had long ago realized that the church separated people by assigning judgments and blame. I had long been on a path of listening to that inner voice that speaks to all of us who come in purity of heart. Yet, until that moment, I hadn't realized how firmly the fear of witches had been implanted into my psyche and into me. "Are you a witch?" I blurted out, blushing scarlet with my own lack of tact. She laughed and shook her head unruffled. "No, a witch is a person trained in the Wiccan path. That is not my training. My path is the path of the goddess. I am a priestess of the Divine Mother in all her forms. But my personal circle is Isis, Kuan Yin, and Sekhmet, the cat-headed being that you saw inside." The Wiccans work with both male and female deities. "Is this why you have 3 cauldrons?" I asked, trying to keep any distress from my voice. She smiled. "Yes, they represent the triple goddess." I had no idea what she was talking about. She saw that and went on. "These are the 3 stages of life that every woman lives through: the maiden, the mother, and the matron. The complete, the wheel of life. The death and the rebirth. The Divine Mother encompasses all of them." I had a lot to learn. "But what about God?" I asked a bit petulantly. "Where does God fall into all of this?" Her eyes blazed. "Trisha, the male version of the Creator has plenty of press for the past few thousand years. There are many advocates for a vengeful, punishing God who separates and divides, who judges and condemns. A God who destroys or conquers everything that will not submit." I felt the power torch her like a flame. I, for one, choose life. I choose a Creator who unites. I choose peace. I choose unity, not division. And war? Our world has seen enough of that to last many lifetimes. She was right. Condemnation, punishment, original sin, blame, and shame seemed to be at the root of all the patriarchal religions, from Islam to Christianity. They said they revered women, and yet they oppressed them. They said they were bringing forth the teachings of the prophets of love, yet they were more eager to tell you what you did wrong and that you would go to hell. To me, something was fundamentally wrong with any version of the Creator that would only bless one group and send the others into oblivion. Yet, this was the world that we had been born into, a world where men taught oppression in the name of God. And their way was taking the entire planet down a path of abuse. We saw it in the exploitation of children, the killing of animals, the pollution of our natural resources. They gave no thought to the generations that would come after. Their only concern were their only profits right now. I remember then the creed that our Native American ancestors had tried to live by. Make no decision that does not serve 7 generations forward. This ensured that we would become wise stewards of the land and the people. I flashed on the words of the Bible, and the tree shall be known by its fruit. Well, our culture and our fruits clearly sprang from a warped and twisted tree. GMOs. Shasta's voice cut in, pulling me from my contemplation. But who remembers the Great Mother, who actually creates everything, the one who gives everything on this planet life? Who honors her? Tears sprang to my eyes. I could think of nothing to say. All things are born of woman, Shasta continued in a voice soft with power. It was so plain a truth that I could not believe it. It had never even occurred to me before, but she was right. Nothing would be born or live without the creative power of the female. Show me one living creature born of man. It doesn't happen. The best we can offer is androgyny or earthworms. I laughed out loud, the image of men claiming to be supreme dominance as huge aggressive earthworms was just too fantastic. The laughter broke the tension. After a moment, Shasta joined me, and I knew we were visualizing the same thing. Honestly, Tricia, in all the cosmos, it is only the mother who is the life giver. How can God be male? I ask you. Males do not give birth, do they? I looked at her, and beneath the myrrh, there was a serious glint in her eyes. She is both the queen of heaven and the mother of earth, but she has been forgotten by her children, dishonored and mistreated. When you come here to this grove, you honor her. I looked out on the ragged beauty of the half-wild garden hidden over by the kudzu, just like the goddess. I thought, hidden unless you have the eyes to see her. Shasta's words brought an entirely new way of thinking into my world. I realized then, in some strange way, I had always accepted God as being male. I had accepted the inner picture of some guy with a long, white, flowing beard who judged and punished us if we didn't do as he said. Shasta, I turned, knowing my present gifts were speaking. I know that the time will arrive when I will come here to study with you, but that time is not yet. There are other things that I must do first, but I am sure this is why the priestess of Isis contacted me in that dream. She nodded. So when I am ready, will you teach me? A mysterious smile played upon her lips. She fixed me with her piercing eyes. So shall it be. And in the years to come, May you discover for yourself the answers to who the Great Mother truly is. We begin Chapter 3, The Feather of Truth. I got 15 minutes. We'll see if I can get through this before we get too long. The Feather of Truth. I had not yet found a place upon which I could stand. I conceived the divine plan of law and order, Ma'at, to make all forms. I was alone. I had not yet emitted Shu, nor bad I yet emitted Tefnut. Nor existed any other who could act together with me. The Egyptian Book of Knowing the Creations of Ra and Overcoming Apophysis. I could not yet find the place upon which I could stand. I conceived the divine plan of law and order. Ma'at makes all forms. Ma'at makes all forms. I was alone. I had not yet emitted Shu, nor bad I yet emitted Tefnut, nor existed any other who could act together with me. Interesting. I'm going to have to read that a couple times, I think. One might think that I would have dived easily into the study of the goddess, but in truth, I was afraid. While the idea of becoming an initiate of any golden path of wisdom strongly appeals to any seeker of truth, I knew that the path of enlightenment had never been easy. Thus I stepped back from taking the plunge. Yeah, this is true. There were several reasons for this. The first was that I was a commercial advertising photographer, and I had a successful business in the real world. My spiritual studies were private, and even though I had a strong natural gift of clairvoyance and clairaudience, inner sight and hearing, and frequencies, saw information about other people with my spiritual vision, I had always kept my esoteric interest private. To begin a study of the divine feminine would be a big step for me. I wasn't sure how it would impact my worldviews. Secondly, I knew that any true spiritual commitment can completely change your life. And at a time when these events began to unfold, my spiritual training had already moved into another direction with an extraordinary group of spiritual masters I had encountered at the age of 19. These very powerful but elusive sages taught a process of meditation called soul travel, which allows seekers to begin to experience the higher worlds for themselves, to activate their subtle spiritual bodies and use them to travel into the unseen realms of God, while still maintaining lives in the three-dimensional world. I was already being guided by a wise, enlightened teacher, and I had just received my third initiation. The third reason that I had stepped back from Shasta's invitation was my own Christian background. As a mystic who had seen and heard and felt the invisible worlds of spirit from the time I was a child, I knew that my studies were already beyond the bounds of my family's conservative belief systems. My dad was raised Baptist and my mother was Methodist. Yet none of the ministers I queried or local churches seemed to have or know any answers about spiritual beings of light that I studied with at night in my dreams. They looked outside themselves for answers, relying on scripture to tell them what to say. I could see that there was no direct connection with the living intelligence of the divine, and thus, even within the houses of God, the light was dim. I noticed this too. As a child, I also noticed a great hypocrisy within the church. On one hand, church leaders seemed to honor Jesus, the God of unconditional love. Yet on the other hand, they taught the doctrines of blame and guilt, fear, damnation from their pulpits, threatening punishment to who did not conform. They also seemed to cultivate a rivalry between various factions of their own Christian creeds, while preaching to their congregations, "Judge not, lest ye be judged." This made no sense to me. How could the God of unconditional love be fearful and angry, or a God of wrath? How could they preach tolerance and forgiveness, yet make other people their enemies? Perhaps, discouraged by these observations, my mother took it upon herself to find a gentler approach to Jesus that we could all identify with. When I was 10, I discovered a sweet Episcopalian parish about 5 miles from our house. I was confirmed there at the tender age of 13. Me too. Interesting. I loved the sacred rituals with their formal robes and the wafering incense and the gatherings, and it was a kind and heartfelt. And I was grateful to hear that the thread of fire and brimstone every Sunday. I knew even then that each of us comes into this world again and again to perfect our inner natures, and that love and that kindness are the keys to shaping our inner natures in the divine image. No matter what the pomp or circumstances of religion, it is in the providence of the heart that the real wisdom dwells. So at this time, I had met Shasta, my oldest sister, and her preacher husband had become fundamentalists. My dad was still a Baptist. My younger sister and mother were evangelists, and they believed that Jesus was the only spiritual teacher and who had the real truth. He was the only guide to their salvation. I believed that there have been many great spiritual avatars and masters who have come onto this planet. Jesus was the most recent and perhaps the greatest world teacher, the one who had come to bring a message for the age of Pisces. A 2,160-year cycle that had begun 400 years before he was born, from which I could see that message had been completely corrupted. And even as a child, I felt the great imbalance of the male-dominated patriarchy had imposed on the world. So I was leery about pursuing a path that might take me even further from my family's beliefs. The magical worlds of spirit. Born with the gifts of inner sight and hearing, I spent the best days of my childhood in the forest across from my parents' house, communing with the trees and the magical springs that bubbled up from the earth. This was the church of God that I knew and loved. It was in that forest that I wrote my first poems to God and listened to that small, still voice that speaks within. There I learned to see the fairy realms and the elemental spirits that oversee the plant and animal kingdoms. Like the guardian angels of the human world, these elemental spirits supervise the world of nature. And sometimes, when I was very still, I could even hear the trees talking and rustling their leaves. But these flashes of knowing swept in and out, borne on the wings of their own mysterious currents. I noticed that too. I would hit these windows of inspiration and connecting to the other realms, but you couldn't recreate it. It was kind of hit or miss. It was very strange, and she's saying that she was going through the same thing. These waves, these own mysterious currents. I did not know how to control these gifts. They came and went as they would. Yes. I know now, years later, as a long-time initiate of the mysteries, that the gifts of inner sight, hearing, feeling, and knowing are just part of the natural unfolding gifts of every spiritual aspirant. The Masters teach that there are 33 of these inner gifts which we acquire in our spiritual road to God, including the gifts of healing, telepathy, levitation, lucid dreaming. But since there was no one there to teach me except for the tall forest angel that appeared from time to time, I spent my time in the woods in prayer, hoping fervently that someone wiser than I would come along to connect the dots. Little did I know that the great Variji master who had heard my call would arrive to initiate me into the teachings when I was 9 years old. So we will begin next on the Viraji Masters. The Viraji Masters, they are an unbroken line of spiritual adepts whose purpose is spiritual liberation of the soul within this lifetime. Brilliant. So we will get into the Viraji Masters when we begin next time. I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here with me. It's so wonderful to do story time and get to share it with you guys, because I've been reading books and stuff for a long time, and it's really fun for me to get to read it live with you, because I read it with you. I don't know what it says until I read it with you, and that's fun for me. And I love this information. I love the spirit of Tricia McCannon. She's a beautiful, enlightened being, and I am super grateful for her works. So I love you guys all, and I will see you on the next one. Have a beautiful day or night wherever you may be, and may soul and spirit be with us all. Much love. Bye.